Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. My name is Nikki Bass and I will be bringing you thoughts, ideas and stories from some incredible guests to hopefully inspire you to live more adventurously in your everyday lives. So today I am delighted to welcome Charlotte Ditchburn to the show. Charlotte describes herself as a public Rights of Way Explorer who is advocating access to outdoor spaces. She's a countryside access officer and an expert in public rights of way, as well as an ambassador for the Ordnance Survey, British Canoeing and the National Outdoor Expo. And through her wonderful blog, she shares posts on campaigns and about her own experiences, paddleboarding, and particularly how the access and how being in outdoor spaces has really helped her from her own mental well-being perspective. And given that her passions, her background, her work align so well with so many key themes of this podcast, particularly around accessibility, inclusivity, and the importance of green and blue spaces to our mental health and well-being, I was really thrilled when Charlotte reached out and agreed to come on the podcast. So it's an absolute pleasure to have her here. And I'm sure we're going to have a huge amount to talk about. So Charlotte, welcome to the show. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's very exciting to be on.
I guess the first question I'd like to ask is, what sparked your interest in accessibility, particularly around outdoor spaces, and obviously inspired you to get into the work that you do?
So I grew up and lived in the Lake District, so I loved the outdoors for my own personal experiences. And then I went off to Newcastle University and did a degree in countryside management. And through that, I discovered Rights of Way and accessibility to the outdoors. And that led to me doing my dissertation for how is the outdoors accessible for everybody, even those with disabilities. And that led me down so many paths to meet so many people and different organisations. And then I also volunteer with the Calvert Trust. So the Calvert Trust is an outdoor activity centre to get people with disabilities into the outdoors to help their mental and their physical well-being. And from there, it just stemmed. I didn't even know my current job existed at the time when I was doing my dissertation. And then I was applying for jobs here, there and everywhere. And a Rights of Way officer job came up in Suffolk. And I thought, that sounds like the perfect cup of tea for me.
No, it's amazing. I mean, likewise, I didn't know your job existed. And it's amazing to hear that it does exist. And that, because so many of the conversations I think I've had on this podcast have been around that point about, how to make the outdoors more accessible, more open and more inclusive. So to know that there's official work going on in this space, I think is brilliant. But I was just wondering from the work that you've done, and I think also, through the work that you do through your blog and everything, what are some of the biggest challenges that you feel people face when it comes to whether it's rights of way or general access?
So the biggest challenge faced by people at the moment, I feel, is the actual legal rights to access these places. So in the countryside, we only have access to about 92% of our countryside to have a legal right to walk wherever you like. And for less than 92%, sorry. And then for the rivers, we have less than 97%. So the very small minority of areas, you actually have a legal right to be there and enjoy those spaces. So the blue spaces on the rivers, just about 4% of the rivers, you can go and paddle and not worry about anyone interrupting you and challenging you as you go for a paddle down the river. And in the countryside, if you're not on a public right of way, if you stray off that footpath or bridle way and you decide you want to have a little picnic or go and take some photos of something that might be of interest slightly off that path, you're actually breaking not a criminal law, a civil law. So the landowner could come and accost you and tell you to get off their land or off their river, and they would have every right to do so. At the moment, it's not a criminal offence, but the government are talking about making that a criminal offence. So one day it might be that you could actually get a criminal record for just stepping off that footpath, which is quite a scary thought for people who may not even know footpaths and rights of way exist. You might not know how to access the outdoors. So embracing education, inspiring others to find out a little bit more about how you can access the outdoors and what you can do to improve that access and extend that access so everyone can do their little bit. And then maybe one day we might have the right to roam all over the country. So the access in Scotland is brilliant. We can roam pretty much anywhere you want. You can pitch up your wild camp tent. As long as you're not doing it in someone's back garden, you can pretty much go wherever you like. And it's not the case in England and Wales. And we're quite restricted and limited to where we can go to enjoy these spaces.
Gosh, it's just shocking, isn't it? When you think about how little how little space we actually have access to in the first place, before you even get to the points about invisible barriers and how people who, can't just step out their front door and be in beautiful countryside to experience it.
And it was really brought home to us with the pandemic we've just experienced, when we were then confined to our homes and our local green spaces, that people realised we don't actually have a lot of green space for a lot of people. So yes, people are very lucky who live in the countryside and can step out of the door and wander onto a footpath and then have a lovely network to then explore. Lots of people found if you're in a high-rise flat, there's a small park down the road and that's all I actually have access to within a couple of minutes walk. And I think it's really exposed the fact that our access is limited at the moment, and really highlighted how important those green and blue spaces are for our mental well-being when we don't actually have access to them.
And like you said, that inequality between who does have access and who doesn't. And like you said, you highlight the very different systems in Scotland compared to Wales and England.
Mm-hmm.
Where does, and this is just me being like really curious, like where does that date from? Is that like partly as a result of the feudal system that we had, or is it actually more about protectionism? Or I'd just be really interested, what you found.
Governments are how it's decided. The Scottish government have a much more, not a radical, but a much more open view on access. And they believe that everyone should be able to be entitled to access those routes. Whereas in England, we're very much in an old mindset of this is my area, this is my land, and I don't want people walking all over it. So in 1949, our countryside, our National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act was brought around, and that's where all our footpaths established from. So everyone in the parish, so each individual parish in England and Wales was divvied up, and the parish councils, scout groups, volunteers headed out with a little map in their hands and went and drew out all of their footpaths that they thought were in their parish. And you often find, if you find big estates on these maps now, there's just a big black hole with nothing on it, and that's a little bit of a surprise. But when you think back to when they were drawing them up, it was when big estate landowners were on the parish council saying, no, there's no footpaths on my land.
Wow.
And going from that, we then moved forward to the year 2000 when the Countryside and Rights of Way Act came, and that opened up a little more space for us. That gave us, in England and Wales, our open access land. So that's area where you can roam wherever you like and not have to worry about stepping off your footpath. So we are moving in the right direction, but that's still a very small proportion of the country compared to Scotland having it everywhere. And again, it's using our common sense. It's Wales are starting to move towards Scotland. They're starting to think about allowing cyclists to use footpaths where it's suitable. And it's just where it's suitable. So if someone was to try and go down a little alleyway in town where there's barely enough space for two people to walk down it, it wouldn't be somewhere that would be great for a cyclist to use as well. But if there's a big open stone track in the countryside, there's no reason why the cyclist shouldn't be able to use it the same way as the walkers do. So we're moving in the right direction, but it's very slow and we're fighting against a lot of people for it.
I was just thinking that, because you mentioned that quite a bit of your work involves sort of education or educating people about what their rights are, where they can walk and that side of things. But I know that you've also, been pretty active in terms of campaigning for those rights to be increased as well. I mean, that must be an interesting balance about, how you educate people. Okay, well then you can't go here and you can't go this, but actually you should be able to. I was just thinking it's a real blend between, what seems on one level to be relatively local and sort of
simple.
Simple. And then on the other hand, it's this really big political and social issue that like you said, needs to be addressed. So from your campaigning, I guess, what are some of the things that I guess you found out that have really surprised you, shocked you? What has it inspired you to do to make a difference, I suppose? How can this be changed?
So through my role with British Canoeing as a She Paddles ambassador, I work on the Clear Access, Clear Waters campaign. And that's getting everyone to get involved. So we go on paddle cleanups. We educate people about where they can and can't access it. So we get that baseline education in there. And then from there, people suddenly get a passion for being outside and being allowed to access those spaces. And from there, we can then get them to email their MPs and write to the government and ask for more access. So the more people that are aware of these issues, the more people that get behind it and get involved in the campaigns. So you're not going to care about something if you've never experienced it before. So it's getting people out there and enjoying it to then realise what's actually going on underneath the surface and see what's limiting them. And then the Ramblers and the British Horse Society, they're working really hard to get all the rights of way recorded by 2026. So we've got this issue where historic public rights of way, they might be shown on old maps and you might be walking it every day with your dog, but you might not realise it's not actually recorded on the definitive map. So that's our legal map to show all the footpaths at the current moment. And if they're not recorded by the year 2026, they'll be lost forever. We won't ever be able to record them again. And then if the landowners wanted to shut them all up, they could. They'd have their legal right to do so and would suddenly be with a lot less rights of way than we have now. So again, it's getting people to realise this and check those dog walks. You don't need to be going out and doing masses of work and doing massive projects, but just check your one little dog walk and make sure that that's safe and protected for future generations.
Gosh, yeah. Well, you know, what struck me as you're saying this is actually, you know, I mean, I go out for dog walks pretty much every day, normally multiple times a day. I have a very energetic Labrador. But I was just thinking actually how little this has, you know, I hadn't heard of this before you brought it to my attention. And I'm pretty sure the majority of people who I meet on my dog walks wouldn't know about this either. And I was just wondering your thoughts on why that's the case. Is it because it's seen as, you know, a sort of a niche area of interest that only is interest to people who work within the countryside, but like you said, actually affects us all? Is it because actually people don't want us to, you know, I mean, I'm not going down the conspiracy theory route, obviously, but just that sort of thing of going, actually, why is this not more widely known if actually there is a cutoff at 2026? Yeah, just be interested in your perspective on that.
I think it's really interesting. And I don't think there's anybody trying to cover it up. I don't think there is a conspiracy to stop us knowing about it. But I do think the people who are interested in it are maybe people who have a passion for it already. So people who are outdoor enthusiasts and people who might be part of a membership body. So if you're part of the British Horse Society, you'll be getting newsletters about these problems, or part of the Ramblers, you'll be getting information into your email box straight away to highlight it. If you're not part of one of those bodies or a charity, then there's not a lot of information in the news or in your general magazine articles to find out about it. And although the information is online, you just wouldn't know to search for it.
Well, this is it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you're going to Google, you know, public rights of way access about your dog walking route, because you like you said, you just make the assumption that it's there.
It's safe. Yeah.
It's really interesting. I was just wondering that, you know, because it sort of brings to that point, I think we touched on earlier around there are the sort of physical barriers, or that, you know, and this sort of policy level barriers as well. But then there are, like you said, the invisible barriers about actually who
knows about it, and how you find
who knows about it,
yes.
And actually who gets to care about it as well, because it's part of their sphere of feeling that it's something that belongs to them. And I was just wondering how much of your work sort of touches on that, and, you know, at what point there's a sort of crossover, I think, between those two areas, coming back to that point about, you know, the social barriers as much as the political ones too.
My work delves into all parts of it, but again, you tend to be reaching the same sort of audience. You're always reaching out to the same people. It's when we're getting people out to volunteer and help do things on the Rights of Way network, it tends to be retired people who've got the time to do it.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that care about it, but they're not necessarily sharing it with everybody. So getting younger generations out just to find out more. They don't need to be actively campaigning, but again, checking on their one route would be a great help. And we do a lot for disabled access. So a lot of my work is on the coast path around Cumbria at the moment, and we're trying to make it mobility scooter friendly. And it's really simple steps, and it's really easy because the legislation allows us to do it. So we have like radar key mobility gates, so you can unlock it to get your mobility scooter right through whilst it's still protecting the landowners from their stock getting out, and things like that. So my work really touches on those sort of things, but it doesn't really touch on spreading the word about the campaigns. And I think it's just word of mouth. So the government, Natural England, they're working really hard to get the countryside code out there. And they've just done a revamp. They've just hit that back out onto social media campaigns and physical leaflet forms to go out on site and some signs for landowners to use. Because again, you're not going to know about something unless you care about it. So you need to find out more about how you can access the countryside safely and in a respectful way. Because through the coronavirus, there was a lot of people accessing the countryside that maybe had never done so before. And there was a lot of disruption. There was a lot of litter being left, a lot of people roaming off the footpaths and ruining crops and just making a muddy mess. So again, we need to reach out to those sort of people to say, look at what you're missing out on here and look what we could have access to. And would you like to get involved and help? So getting into those little smaller communities and getting the word spread at a lower level rather than this high policy level with all the policy makers that know all about it. It's getting that generic knowledge down and fed out to the lower people.
Interesting, isn't it? That, yeah, I was just thinking about who tends to own the land and who tends to, that there's also so many. Yeah, I'm so taken back to like my medieval history with all of this and how land, and I do think there's so much of a legacy that we tend to ignore about how land is carved up, where the land sit, particularly in this country, given our history. And then how that, I guess, manifests in a modern day sense about, people don't care enough about it, or people, rather than actually, given how this country has evolved, there are so many other issues there to unpick that I think, I suppose if they don't get addressed, becomes a circular discussion about people not caring about, littering or transgressing versus, that's why we can't allow people access to the land because they don't care about it or they don't take care of it, or, who are all the masses, the unwashed masses coming and enjoying our beautiful private space. And sorry, I could go on a little bit about this.
And it's really funny speaking to the landowners these days, and they do have a very old-fashioned mindset to things. And actually, as the younger generations are coming through, and when you speak to the older generations and actually explain the issues and how they can be addressed, people actually are opening their mindsets up a bit, but it's taking people to go out and speak to those people and actually address those issues rather than just letting it carry on in that cycle and saying, we want to let people on, what can we do to help you do that? So if that means putting some more signs up so people know where they can and can't access, putting some no cycle signs on footpaths if they don't want cyclists trashing their farm crop, things like that. There's a lot that can be done to actually bring those people around to the idea of more access. And I think, again, on the water, a lot of people don't realise where they are and aren't allowed to go. You've got to buy permits to go on the lakes in the Lake District, and it's a barrier for people because they're just unsure. So they're like, I'm not sure about it, I just won't go. So if we can get through to those landowners and make it more obvious to the public from both sides, there'll be more happy people enjoying the outdoors.
No, totally. And I think, I was just thinking how much of the onus of that engagement is on those people who do have access to the land too. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. I want to change tack slightly because we talked about how important, how to get that access to the land, but then also, and like you said, and the waterways as well. And I've certainly come across those barriers myself, but also why it's actually important, as well as preserving the spaces, and we touched on it earlier, just around how there's so much research now around green and blue spaces and how they support our well-being and our physical and our mental well-being too. And I was just wondering, because I know it's something that you talk about in your blog about how it's really helped you from a mental well-being perspective. And I was just wondering, how that's the case, what benefits it's brought you, what difference it makes to be able to get out on your paddleboard or, go out for a wander in the countryside.
I used to love being in the outdoors as a child, although I hated being dragged out on long walks and big expedition sort of things. That was not my cup of tea. But then I went off to university and my outdoor experiences kind of just dropped off the radar, and I spent a lot of time in town, a lot of time driving around the country, being very busy. And then in about 2015, I got diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety and depression, and I found it the lowest point in my life. I was really unhappy, but I found that I wasn't outdoors much, and I came home back to the Lake District for a little while and found my love for the outdoors again. And it really gave me a safe space to immerse myself in nature and just process these thoughts that I was having and cope with the things that I was dealing with without any pressure from other people. And just a safe space to enjoy those small things again. And then in the last year or so, I've discovered paddleboarding, and that is a whole new realm of enjoyment on the water. I have found that so tranquil and so peaceful. So lots of the outdoor experiences end up with me hiking up a hill and being absolutely knackered at the top and being like, well, yes, I've got my endorphins from my walking. But actually paddleboarding allows you just to pass through nature and watch it go by. I've seen kingfishers, seen all sorts on the rivers, and actually it's a whole new realm of things to explore, and it's been amazing for my mental health. And I'm now, at the moment, I'm working in the outdoors, spend my spare days off in the outdoors, and I'm just so much happier for it. My stress has gone down. I would say my immune system's improved, but touch wood, I haven't had coronavirus yet, so I'll just keep being outdoors and hope that helps.
No, absolutely. I like the point you made about, actually, it's almost when you'd forgotten about the impact of the outdoors or hadn't recognized it, that actually
it meant the most.
Yeah, exactly. That was the thing you needed to find your way back to. And I think it's also actually when we were in those periods that I think it can feel most difficult to access the things that help us too.
Yeah. I make a conscious effort now. I know if I'm getting stressed at work, or if I'm trying to move house at the moment, that's quite a stressful situation, that I need to take that time out and go and enjoy a bit of time outdoors, whether that means just walking down the road with the dogs or going outside and just sitting in nature for a little while. I need to make that time to do that for myself. And I don't think I necessarily thought about that before. And now it enters my head, I can feel those triggers setting off. I know what I need to do to sort that out. And I know that the outdoors is a big part of that.
Yeah, no, I completely, and I was just thinking actually how that probably helps you in your work too, knowing how important it is to have access to these spaces, not just from the physical perspective as well, that, you know, that there is something, I think, when we do reconnect with the world around us. And like you said, I find it really interesting with paddleboarding, particularly because I tend to paddleboard on the sea when I do it, which is more of an exercise in trying not to get swept off in the currents than it is a relaxing endeavor. Probably says something about where I maybe should think about going next time. But I was just thinking that thing you were saying about actually the stillness of going down the rivers and having that time to notice the small things, sort of noticing nature around you, that it's not just about being outside, that it's actually about reconnecting in a way with what's happening outside that actually has nothing to do with you.
Yeah. It's really funny because you can often bustle around. You can think, I need my time outside. I'll go for a run down the road. I'll get back. I'll get on with this. I'll get on with that. And actually, it's not necessarily helping you as much as it could be just taking that moment to relax in nature outdoors. And yes, it's great to go out and have adventures and expeditions and do those great outdoors things. But often it's just that time to slow down in nature that helps you so much more.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I was just thinking, given your experiences, I mean, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking either, I'd like to know more about, this issue around access, or actually, the point you were making about why green and blue spaces are so important, why we need to be able to access them. They're thinking, I'd love to sort of investigate this more or embrace this more for myself. I mean, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
I would say, look at your access and take a moment to enjoy and make time for that. And then just take a little bit of your time. It's worth every second for you to investigate that little bit of access that you want to know about, whether it's doing a quick Google or asking. You can go online, ask me, ask someone that you think might know a little bit more about it, and just finding that little bit of information can actually delve into a whole little rabbit hole of amazing things about the outdoors you never even knew. And just being a bit more inquisitive and wanting to learn a little bit more about your outdoors and where you can access it is totally worth your time. And just enjoy the outdoors, make more time for it, and soak up every minute you can, whether it's in the pouring down rain or in the glorious sunshine. It's amazing to be outside.
That's incredible. I was just thinking when you were saying that, I was thinking it's a little bit like me for this podcast, actually. One of the things that's been so wonderful about it is that, one, I'm not sure who's going to get in touch with me or what I'm going to learn as a result of having these conversations. So of which you are a perfect example. So thank you so much, Charlotte. That's been absolutely amazing. If people want to find out more about the work that you do, about your blog, about the campaigns, where can they go?
They can head to my website, which is my blog, which is prowexplorer.com, or they can head over to my Instagram, which is Public Rights of Way Explorer. And always feel free to pop me a message if you want to find out more. Lots of people want to know how I got into my job, get lots of messages about that. So I'm always there, always open. Do get in touch.
I'm not surprised. So I was about to say, I having not heard of it previously, and if I'd known about, certainly, I think that's such an amazing job that to be doing, and it sounds like it is the perfect fit for your experiences and your knowledge and what works for you too. That's brilliant. I will pop all of those links in the show notes as well, so people can go and find them. Charlotte, thank you so much again. It's been such a pleasure to chat to you, and I could have kept asking you questions a lot longer. So maybe we'll have to get you back as we get closer to 2026 and find out how we're all doing as well.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much for having me. It's been a lovely experience, and hope to hear from everyone soon.
Oh, brilliant. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
So a massive thank you to Charlotte for coming on the show and for speaking so passionately and eloquently about not only rights of way and how they impact us, but also how the outdoors has in turn supported and benefited her and what it has brought to her personally as well as professionally. I always find it so inspiring when somebody has managed to find a role and a job and has created a life that enables them to live wholly and fully. And what I loved about what Charlotte was saying was actually that simplicity that comes when those different parts of your life align. And also for me, I think the other aspect that I found so fascinating was just learning so much in terms of access. One thing that I should bring to your attention is that since this podcast was recorded, thankfully, the deadline to record Public Rights of Way by 2026 has now been scrapped. So it was scrapped sort of mid to late February. And obviously that's certainly for Charlotte in her line of work, that's a real cause for celebration. But I think also for more generally, as Charlotte so rightly pointed out, given what limited access there is currently to land particularly in England anyway, knowing that land can continue at least to be accessed at that small percentage is definitely a bonus. So yes, I suppose the thing that I'm left with this week really is the many multiple of layers that go into making up what we consider to be the outdoors, which is then obviously intrinsically interlinked with how accessible those spaces are. And often when we talk about accessibility in outdoor spaces, it can be taken very much at face value. Can we get into that place? Can't we get in? It might be from a practical point of view, or it might be about sense of belonging. But I think what underlies all of that is about this disparity in not only believing that we have a place there, but also how the world around us or the places around us are structured to either enable or prevent that. And these are things that often we don't have sight of, that we're not privy to that information. And yet it's so important that structural inequality in the end exists, whether we know about it or not. But often it can be put down to individuals not prioritizing time in the outdoors, or, that certain groups aren't that interested in it. And all of this sort of narrative that is constructed around it, when you delve deeper, as Charlotte so clearly illustrated, that there are so many layers going back so many different centuries that mean that the way in which we are able to get into these spaces is structured, has been developed, and that we need to recognize that if we want to have any hope of removing some of those barriers that different groups face. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this. As always, please do feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram, Resilience at Work, or Everyday Adventure Pod. You can find me on LinkedIn, Nikki Bass. You can find me on Facebook in the Everyday Adventure Club or Resilience at Work. And you can also reach out to me via my website, resiliencework.co.uk. So I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this episode, please do leave me a review on your favorite podcast listening site, wherever that may be. And otherwise, I will be back again next week with another wonderful guest. And I look forward to speaking to you then. Take care. Bye.